Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I want to recognize and thank the World Affairs Councils, not only the one here in New York, but all over the United States, for the intense promotion of dialogue and participation of citizens in world affairs. Today was an important day here in the United States. This process, this electoral process, is calling the attention of most everybody, everywhere in the world. Marta and myself just came back from a trip abroad. We went to Madrid, then Jakarta, then Dubai, then Istanbul, working. The trip had to do with my new responsibility, the presidency of the Center Democrats International, which gathers over 110 political parties with center ideology, and from over 88 different nations, different democracies throughout the world. And I went to Jakarta to preside the annual meeting of the 20 political parties of Asia that are associated with the CDI. And I was highly surprised how open and wide today is the range in center ideologies, because the CDI used to be called the Christian Democrat International, but the word Christian now has been withdrawn, because some of those parties in Asia are either Muslim or Hindus or Mahometans, and I am very, very pleased that it's so wide open, the capacity to be working in a political party with a center ideology, with commitment with market, sound market economy policies, with intense commitment with human beings, with the dignity of human beings. But the case is that on that trip, everywhere, everybody was speaking about the election here. And I think it's to congratulate this mature democracy in the United States that over 200 years still is a renewal in every election. It refreshes, it brings back optimism, hope, and intense citizens' participation. I think that what is going on here is an example for other democracies, and certainly will have an impact and influence in different grades of consolidation in democracies throughout the world. There are many that are very recent, and they need this kind of example, this kind of events like we are witnessing here. So congratulations to these great democratic nations. I wanted to share with you some thoughts precisely departing from this election and maybe trying to look ahead into the future, especially the role of this great nation, which, by the way, I feel part of, which, by the way, I respect a lot and share the core values of the founding fathers of this nation. Maybe because my grandfather was born here, and that you will be able to read on the book in Cincinnati, Ohio. And surprisingly, he came down to Mexico on a horse back in 1895 as a migrant without a penny in his pocket. He came all the way down to the state of Guanajuato in Mexico, and he settled there. He was, of course, after his American dream. And he found his American dream in Guanajuato, Mexico. And this is to say that we a lot of people most people share that dream and those values. And also to say that migration is a two-sided issue. It's a multilateral, bilateral issue. It's a phenomenon that is present everywhere in the world. And it's surprising that very few nations, to say not one that I know, has developed a framework, a legal base, a project related to migration to make sure that it keeps being a win-win situation. No doubt that migration is an asset to most nations. We just have to see how this nation was built and developed by migrants. And most everybody in this nation, if you look behind, would have a heritage from migrants outside. And the same thing happened in Mexico. We all remember those huge amounts of thousands and thousands of Spaniards that came through the port of Veracruz, same as others came through the port of New York, through Ely Island. And same thing happened in Argentina or Brazil. So migration is an asset. And I'm, in a way, disappointed on the debate about immigration here in the States. I think that debate is totally misinformed, is misguided. It's maybe a product of the fear that I sense in this nation after September the 11th. And that was a tragic day that should never repeat again. But still, it's not fair to confuse immigrants with terrorists. And fear will never be a good advisor to take decisions. And we see this vacuum, this empty space, because U.S. Congress has not faced the issue, has not reached a decision in years and years. And there is enough proposals, there's enough bills pretty well structured in Congress for them to decide. It is a federal issue. But with this vacuum, what is happening is that local authorities now are taking the lead and the responsibility on this issue. And some of them with reforms and changes that are very aggressive against migrants, that are real promoters of violating human rights. And because of the absence of U.S. Congress on this decision, the xenophobics have taken over. And we turn on the TV and you find there the lewd dogs, the O'Reillys, with a language very extremely aggressive, offensive to migrants, offensive to Mexico, and to Mexican government. And again, I would say totally misinformed. So I think it's very important to enrich this debate that is going on right now on this electoral process. And I do hope, and I'm optimistic, that the next administration will take care and meet this challenge so that we have a reform on immigration. It will be to the better of our nations, to Mexico, to the United States. No doubt that this nation has enriched itself through migrants and that has made its economy competitive through migrants working hard with quality, with dedication, with loyalty. And no doubt that many sectors of the economy in the United States survive thanks to the migrants, like it is all the production in agriculture, farming, cattle, the construction industry, the service industry, the health industry now is beginning to be supported by these migrants. And at the very end, they have made this economy competitive. And at the very end, they have brought in quality of life to the homes of U.S. families. So my respect to all migrants. I should make clear that I'm not for illegality, that I am not for open borders. What I am for is legality, order, and a proper framework to manage the issue of migration. It's a bilateral issue. We both have to do, because the United States needs those workers and hires those workers to the benefit of this economy. And Mexicans, I should say, because it's a wrong opinion, that not all migrants, I would say only a very few migrants come here because of hunger or because they don't have a job. Most of them that are coming in the last years, they do have a job in Mexico. They do and did have income. But the migrant, like my grandfather, is always looking for better. Is always looking to improve the conditions of its family. And this is why they take that decision, why they take the risk, and why they come here. So I think that this is one key issue for the future, and the decision on immigration should be taken now, if possible. Of course, that to the future, what this nation is facing, and the next administration will do so, it's very complicated, very complex, the situation in the world. Wars, violence, and all these shake-ups and crisis of the economy and the financial system today that, again, call for attention everywhere in the world. What I foresee is that a change in the paradigm of the presence and leadership of this great nation in the world. This change in paradigm should move towards diplomacy over military force. It should move towards multilateralism over unilateralism. It should move to democratic and compassionate leaders, solidarity over selfishness, unity instead of dividing, listening over imposing, negotiating, democratic dialogue with full respect to other nations. Of course, no interventions like the one in Iraq or in other parts of the world. That's why we created the United Nations. We all together did. Mexico, United States were founders of that great institution that should be reinforced, restructured, reformed, so that it meets the challenges of bringing peace and harmony among nations. United States has to rebuild the strategic alliances that have been lost. Europe, for instance, even Canada, a neighbor. And what about Mexico? It's strategic to have solid friends, solid democracies together to work for a better world. It must be reinvented. The whole concept of foreign aid is not serving the purpose. It has to be granted with a sense of responsibility. We should move from foreign aid to a partnership for prosperity. It's much better to invest, much better to teach how to fish than to give away the fish. We must, or this nation must work together with other developed economies in the world to assure the compliance made public, the commitment of putting on the aid program 0.7% of the gross product. I witnessed that commitment. I was present when the leaders committed. But we don't see that happening. We don't see the resources now being applied to combat poverty, to reduce debt, and to bring up those countries that have lost hope and that don't have many opportunities to move ahead. The Kyoto Protocol, the problems with the climate, the WTO and the Doha round, which has been discussed for years and years and years, and time goes by and no solutions. So the key to us is the relationship of this great nation with Mexico and with the whole of Latin America. Up to now, there is a total absence of attention and respect for our nations and the rest of the continent. Again, a change of paradigm is needed there. We all recall in Latin America those great driving ideas like the Alianza para el Progreso that was launched by President Kennedy, that unfortunately he couldn't carry on with it. But we miss that kind of actions, like the Marshall Plan for Europe. We have that successful European Union with great democracies and economies, with high standards of living due to the Marshall Plan. No doubt that was a moving, strong, leading idea that we would love to see again, because I don't really understand the leader, the champion of democracy, of globalization, moving backwards. We all nations were convinced 10, 15, 20 years ago that we should open our markets, that we should open our economies, and we did so. Unfortunately, things worked out, but the poor in our nations paid a high price for the economic reforms and for opening the markets and for meeting competition from abroad in our nations in Latin America. And today, incredible, this nation is building a wall. I don't really understand what's the purpose of that wall. The threat is not migrants. The threat will be isolation. Who is going to be inside that wall? Who is going to stay out? What's going to happen with the Andrew Groves, president of Intel, who came from Hungary and has contributed to this nation incredibly, to the competitiveness of this economy, to create jobs? And how many more people will be on the same dilemma? President Reagan, in front of the wall in Berlin, shouted loud and clear, "Tear off this wall." Walls don't work. The Berlin Wall didn't work against freedom. The Chinese Wall didn't work against their enemies. So that wall that is being constructed by Mexicans, I hope it will be tear off by Mexicans in the future, that we have understanding instead of division and separation. When we understand that we have a partnership, that we're partners, Mexico, United States, and Canada, and we have to be up to the commitments of that partnership. Many people don't know that Mexico buys from United States more products and services than what Italy, France, Germany, and Britain do together. We buy from this nation, we import over $200 billion US worth of products and services. That means a lot of jobs, millions of jobs for US citizens. We're partners building a future together. And my vision is that we need to keep advancing with NAFTA. We need to further integrate. We need to understand this partnership and make prosperity out of that partnership. Mexico is doing its part of the job. It was already mentioned here, the transition to democracy, the first democratic administration in Mexico, founding the pillars on which to build a successful nation, a solid economy. It was our proposal, our commitment to converge in economic variables with the United States economy. Unfortunately, it happened. The last year of my administration, inflation rate in Mexico was lower than inflation rate in the United States. Interest rates in Mexico were at the same exact level than interest rates in the United States. And we came a long way from very high interest rates and very high inflation to those figures. And we had a superávit on the budget, which this nation cannot say. And today, the foreign debt of Mexico has been reduced to half of what it was, from 80 billion to 40 billion. And a last word about democracy, because it's something that we must protect, that we must nourish and promote. Specifically today, when we see these regression trends, these worrying trends in Latin America. It was very difficult for Latin America, the 20th century. We were the big loser. We lost our time in hands of dictators, military dictators, personal dictators, authoritarian governments, corruption. That was the 20th century for Latin America. But on the 80s and the 90s, nations decided to move into democratic consolidation. And we saw and witnessed that democratization wave, together with economic reforms that were very painful, specifically for the poor. They were the losers at the beginning when those reforms were carried on. But today, at the end of the century, Latin America started moving ahead after those changes. And Latin America is back to growth of 5% on its gross product, which didn't happen since 50 or 60 years ago. But more important, Latin America for the first time has a very, very impressive reduction of the amount of families in poverty. In the case of the whole of Latin America, a drop from 45% of the population either in poverty or extreme poverty dropped down to 35%. And in the case of Mexico, the advance is much more solid, over 35% reduction of the number of families in poverty or extreme poverty in the last 10 years. So democracy pays off. Stability pays off. And that's what we have to keep in Latin America. I respect social democrats. I admire many of their governments, like the one of Presidente Lagos, or the one of Felipe González in Spain, or in Germany, or in France, or in other places. They do great governments. It's a solid ideology, as well as center ideology, or center right. But what I don't think is convenient to our nations is demagoguery, is populism, is messianic leaders that lie to people that we see back in Latin America. We see it in Venezuela, in Ecuador, in Bolivia. And we in Mexico have very present the case of one president that was similar to that, Presidente Echeverría, who decided to follow the same ideology and the same trend. And we're still 35 years after paying the price in Mexico. So Marta and I have decided to keep working after we left the presidency. We just didn't want to retire. Retiring and having nothing to do is beginning to die. So we are meeting new challenges. One is the presidency of the CDI. Number two is building a presidential library. First experience ever in Mexico or Latin America of a presidential library. It's not easy. We have to confront opposition. We have to confront lack of understanding that presidents don't have to go home, don't have to hide away, don't have to go to other nations, but they can keep themselves very active, like President Toledo is doing, like President Cardoso or Lagos is doing, like President Aznar or Felipe González, like President Fox. It's very fortunate, this new trend of very active presidents. But in Mexico, the culture still calls for presidents to keep quiet because I don't know what reason. And you cannot intervene in politics. You cannot open your mouth. You cannot give a press conference. I mean, on the sake of what? I don't understand that. That's a pure priista culture, the old regime's culture. But today, Mexico also, and that is changing. This library, it's an academic and educational library or center associated with many important universities, like Georgetown, like George Washington, like Emory in Atlanta, like Complutense in Madrid, like Salamanca in Spain, or Francisco de Victoria, like Tecnológico de Monterrey, or Iberoamericana, or Guanajuato State University. And all of them are working programs to run through the center, diplomas, PhDs, masters, that will be run there. So what for? To create, to produce, to impulse, to promote a new cast of leadership, of political leadership, highly needed in Latin America. With those core values we have spoken about, ethics to begin with. And that kind of leaders we want to create through the center. Number two is a think tank, a place to reflect, to meet with other leaders and discuss subjects that are key to our nations. There we are associated with the RAND Corporation, the largest think tank in the world, over 1,000 specialists that work full-time with the RAND Corporation. We offer them the land and the building, and in exchange, they accepted to open their office, their first office in Mexico, in the Rancho San Cristobal, by the side of the center, where they will have their staff to attend Mexico and Latin America, and where they will bring in their specialists and researchers to Guanajuato to investigate and to work on public policies that are adequate for the progress of our economies in Latin America and for the progress of the powerful social policies in Latin America. So that center is right there. Matt and myself, we are right there in San Cristobal, Rancho San Cristobal, where my grandfather came and settled, where he found his American dream. Now you have your home there, and I mean it. You have a home there. All of you will be open arms and waiting for your visit. You can contact us on www.centrofox.org.mx. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, we proceed with.
We now have questions, and I'm going to take the liberty of the chair maybe to ask the first one and get the discussion started. And in keeping with what President Fox was saying about how Mexico is changing and former presidents can now comment on politics in Mexico, I'd like to ask a follow-up question to Mexico's last election, and which reminded some of us here of our 2000 election, the closeness of it, and the suspicions that and the divisions that emerged from that election. And I think it was worse in Mexico, maybe because Mexico didn't have the kind of history that we had. And I'm just wondering how Mexico is doing. We haven't heard a great deal here since there was all the conflicts and all the divisions of the period. Are the divisions healing? And what is the agenda for reform now in Mexico in the period ahead?
Well, as all of you know, it was a very tight election. Hola, Marta.
Hola.
¿Cómo te fue? ¿Estás llegando a tiempo? Ya nos vamos. Ya vamos al cóctel. Ay, está Marta. You know, all what I was speaking about, we work it together. We share dreams, we share professional activities, we share love in our marriage, and we really work together, very happy. And no doubt that love is a moving force for attaining things. So a kiss to Marta, although he's late. Yes, it was a very tight election, complicated electoral process, because one of the competitors decided to challenge our institutions, all of them. The presidency, the Congress, the judiciary, the electoral authorities, on the claim that he was right and all the rest of us were wrong. And you know who am I speaking of, Mr. López Obrador. And how things have gone after. Number one, we have a great president today, young, with very strong character, a Harvard graduate, very smart in politics, with gran colmillo, as we say there. And we had the fortune, because it's the same party that I'm on PAN. So we had the opportunity between those 5 months, between the election day and the inauguration day, to have many, many conversations and many, many meetings. Both of us, as well as with our respective teams. And that gave us the opportunity to really dig into the problems, the remaining problems, which are many, dig into the areas that have been successful and are very solid today, And so through that, build up a program that would attend with priority the things we couldn't accomplish. For instance, security, drug trafficking, organized crime. And as you have seen now, Presidente Calderon's #1 priority is that one, and he's acting with all the power of the state, with all the commitment of his government. He brought in the army to get him involved in the situation and make sure that we win this war as soon as possible. And no doubt we're going to win that war. Although right now we seem to be on the middle of the battle. There's a lot of killings between cartels and members of cartels, a lot of killings between police forces and cartels, but Calderon will keep the pressure and will keep the strategy until we win. Fortunately, in that area, he's getting the association, the partnership, and the support of the United States. Because again, it's a shared responsibility. The problem of drugs and organized crime is not Mexico that generates it. It's also the huge consumer market in the United States. And the amount of money that it generates, those billions and billions of US dollars that go to Mexico to bribe government officials, to bribe police chiefs, to bribe police corps. So fortunately then, on that issue, we're working together, and again, that will help to advance quickly, to reduce the problem. Also, extraditions now are being done frequently. The capos are being transferred to meet U.S. justice, and that is also an additional resource to make sure that we win that battle. Number two, the reforms. The very first month of my government, I submitted to Congress a tax reform. I submitted to Congress an energy reform. I submitted to Congress a labor reform, and I submitted to Congress a modification on the pension plans, which is a heavy burden upon the budget in Mexico. And out of the four, we only have a very modest advance on pension plans, but the rest was not even discussed seriously in Congress, and so they kept sleeping and lying right in Congress. But President Calderon has retaken these issues and working back again on them. He finally got a tax reform, not as needed, not as much as the country needs to invest in infrastructure and building human capital and education, but it's a step forward. In these days, the energy reform is going to be discussed, I hope, and I pray that it is discussed, because Mexico is sinking together with its oil industry. There's no resources to use our natural resources. There is no budget and no money to extract the oil and the natural gas that we have. There is no money for government to build the power plants that we need. So we must open the sector for private investment. Mexico is the only remaining nation that still keeps a full monopoly on energy. It's the only remaining nation. Not even Cuba, nor China, nor nobody else. It's only Mexico that still keeps this resource in total hands of the state. And it's a big mistake, and we need to move forward in that direction. And later on will come, I hope, also the reforms related to labor and advance additional steps on pension plans. So that's the second priority, and is being attended, fortunately. The third priority and most important is education. I mean, education is the cornerstone of development. Education is the only way we can overcome poverty. And unfortunately, the education system in Mexico is still very weak. It's not modern and competitive with education systems in other parts of the world. And still, although we're trying hard, not all kids and all citizens have equal opportunity to be in school up to university levels. So we must increase the scholarships. My last year in government, it was 5.6 million scholarships to families, not to kids, because education is free, but you still have to give this support money to the families so that they don't withdraw the kid from school and make sure that he stays there. And this is that program that was already mentioned here, Oportunidades. 1 million scholarships for university level, which were granted on year 2006. So we have to keep the pace and even increase it in the case of education. And finally, poverty. I mean, you need a good, running, solid market economy with responsibility. But you would have to associate to that a powerful, very powerful social policies in housing, in combating poverty, in health care. And so an integrated social net, social security net for all, very inclusive to all citizens.
Thank you. I'm going to call, I see a lot of hands, and we're going to wait for the mic. I'm going to call first on John Bradamus and wait for the mic, and that'll give me a chance to say that John, for 8 years, was the chairman of the board of the NED, and of course the former president of NYU and the congressman from South Bend for 22 years.
Home of the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame.
Bravo, 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 muy bien.
Señor Presidente, that was a brilliant speech, very powerful, very moving. Allow me a couple of personal words. 60 years ago, I was working on an early form of Peace Corps in the mountains of rural Puebla, in villages of Chalacapan and Chacapechpan. I wrote my senior honors essay at Harvard on the Sinarquista movement. I don't know if the Sinarquistas still exist or not, a little bit. I am especially pleased at your emphasis on education, because in Congress I served in the Education Committee for 22 years, and then I became president of New York University, which is the largest independent university in our country, where we have established the Centro Rey Juan Carlos I de España and a cátedra in the name of Andrés Bello. And I'm pleased to say that your former colleague, Jorge Castañeda, is now a member of our faculty. I am also pleased to say that only today I learned that New York University is planning to establish a program in Mexico. And I'll take the liberty of letting you know about it and hope we can persuade you to pay a visit. I have a specific question. Beyond what you've already said, and beyond the immigration issue, and I'm the son of an immigrant, by the way, from Greece, do you have 2 or 3 specific policies you would recommend to the next President of the United States? And I spoke in Jalapa a few weeks ago on Hillary Rodham Clinton as political leader, para decirle donde estoy en esta cosa.
Junto con Marta también.
Sí. I would be grateful if you could give us 2 or 3 policies to recommend to the next President of the United States and next Congress, specifically to improve our relationships with the people of Latin America and the countries of Latin America. Thank you very much, and again, I salute you on a brilliant presentation.
Gracias. Well, I mentioned some immigration reform as soon as possible, only to bring order and a framework that will balance supply and demand at the very end. There should not be more immigrants here than the ones that the economy and the jobs have available, because otherwise it will be waste of human energy. So that's the balance that we have to look for. So the proposal is very concrete in Congress, and by the way, it's Kennedy's McCain proposal, both senators, they brought in that proposal. And it proposes, number one, that all that are here undocumented, if they have a job and they prove that they have a job, they should be allowed to stay, keep their job, and keep contributing to this economy, legally and documented. Not become U.S. nationals. That's a different avenue. One is immigration and the work they do, and the other one is becoming U.S. national. By the way, most of Mexicans here do not aspire or are desiring to become U.S. nationals. They want to go back. They'd rather have tortilla, chile, and beans than hot dogs or hamburgers. Number two, there is a figure which is very solid, determined by economists and by U.S. government and other sources. This economy needs 500,000 new workers every year just to keep the pace of growth that it has now, on the average of 2%, 2.5%. And so for that, the proposal is that temporary guest program, through which these people will come with a contract, that they would have a contract to work for a year, 2 years, or as long as the company, the U.S. company or the U.S. institution or the U.S. family wants to hire them. So they will come under that condition. Now, that temporary guest program will have to be, would have to decide where would they come from, because not only Mexico. Today, it's people coming from Central America, from Asia, from India. Where would they come, how many will come, and how long they would stay. But it will be on the temporary basis. And I think it's that simple, because then you approach this balance of supply and demand, which is the best for both of our nations. And I know Mexico has to keep its firm commitment to build opportunities, job opportunities, university opportunities, and house opportunities for all the young people in Mexico, and we're doing so. We're very close on reaching that level of having the capacity to absorb our own demand. And why is this? Because Mexico used to grow, not long ago, 20 years, at 3.5% a year, its population. Impossible for any economy or for any nation to cope with the needs of a growing population at that fast rate. Fortunately, now Mexico is under 1% population growth a year, under 1%. And Mexico's total population will level off by year 2035, and will level off at the amount of 130 million people. We are today 105. So Mexico will grow up until 130, and that's it. And when we look back at the 20th century, we doubled 3 times the population. That will never happen again. We went from 20 million to 40 million to 80 million to 104 million at the end of the century. So this century, 130, and that's it. That will help a lot in this case. Now, other things is we must accelerate the dynamics of counter actions against security, drug, and crime. We have to keep accelerating so that we meet the objectives there. And for this, the approval of the U.S. collaboration funds that have already been mentioned by President Bush and that he proposed to Congress, but they have not been approved. And I think it's urgent that they be approved, because right now Mexico and Presidente Calderón are giving this battle by themselves. They need this help, so I hope it's approved soon. Now, we need a new NAFTA vision. We need to move ahead. It's been very successful, 10 years, but now we need to further integrate according to my point of view. We need to proceed to a customs union. We need to define the process of integration long-term, 20, 30 years from now, like the European Union did. And I think we have a great potential in this new vision of NAFTA. We have to activate some very solid agreement that we reached between the two administrations, which is the Partnership for Prosperity. It's a great program that will have a great impact in both of our nations. And so we have to activate it because it's a little bit sleeping right now. And extend that concept down south. Because we caught in Mexico in year 2006 over 250,000 Central Americans that came into Mexico illegally and that were on their way to United States. So we need to bring down development all the way down south, including Central America. And there is this program of Puebla, Panama, which I would certainly invite the United States to join in and work on it. And finally, retake the Continental Trade Agreement that was proposed back in Quebec in year 2001. We all agreed on it until Hugo Chavez came in and he said, no way, I don't accept no Continental Agreement. And if I'm not there, there is no Continental Agreement for everybody. I dare to propose that let's leave Venezuela and Chavez aside and let's build up a Continental Agreement for ourselves. And so that's about some of the things that I think are needed.
Why don't we take about 3 or 4 questions, and then you can, so we'll give more people a chance to speak. Maybe 2 hands here in the middle and 1 over there and maybe 1 over here. So we'll take those 2 over there.
Two
If we can get
2
the
ladies.
No, there's a gentleman behind the lady. Can we get a mic over here? Is it possible? Over here, right over here. Let's try to move that mic around.
It's going to be complicated to get.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. On the issue of energy reform, if only a couple small steps are going to be taken this year, what steps do you think are most important to take to start the process of modernizing the energy sector?
Okay, why don't you give it to the gentleman right behind you?
Okay, you were talking about repression before, and the Chinese model seems to be offering a lot of popularity to a lot of nations, including some in Latin America, obviously Venezuela. What's your view on that? Economic freedom, political repression seems to be the goal. And there was a sobering article in the New York Times last week about the waving goodbye to hegemony, where the United States will become a minimal player on the world stage. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies is basically the clue. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, why don't you pass the mic back over this way, and then, I know that's a large question. You want to answer those 2 while we're passing the mic?
Yeah. Okay, in relation to oil industry, my choice would be what Petrobras did and Brazil did, which is the state company opening up shares and send them in public through the stock exchange. And I think it would be very convenient to also place them among the workers of the industry so that they would have a share. And any Mexicans that would like to have some shares. Up to selling or placing, colocando, 20-25% of the net worth, the capital worth of Pemex, you would have enough money to do all the deep drilling in the Gulf of Mexico to extract the natural gas and everything. If not that, it's opening for private investment associated with public investment. For instance, refineries. I mean, what's the case of Pemex being owner of the refineries if they don't operate them efficiently? Number 2, they don't have money to reinvest on them. And number 3, they're old and obsolete. And we're importing 40% of the gasoline we consume in Mexico. And when we put together all the imports that we do on processed products from oil into Mexico, I don't think we would have a super rabbit. I think we will be just breaking even between the oil that we export and the imports that we do from, we're importing gasoline from Turkey. Now that I was in Istanbul, I learned that. I didn't know that. That's incredible. Gasoline from Turkey. Wow. And it's still this obsolete left, or extreme left that we have in Mexico, still claiming that the oil belongs to all Mexicans. And yes, it belongs to all of us, but what is good for us with that? So that's it.